Hello, welcome to the final event of Jewish Poets, Jewish Voices for the 2020-2021 season. I'm Melanie Rubin, Director of Senior and Adult Programs for the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center, Jacobs Family Campus. And on behalf of the Astor Judaica Library and San Diego Center for Jewish Culture, we're excited to bring you Jewish Poets of the Past, featuring the works of two Israeli poets. Please note that we will not have open mic this evening, and we will be recording this program, so you're welcome to turn off your video if you so choose, but we like for people to keep it on. Throughout the year, we've brought you these events free of charge to make programs accessible to anyone who wishes to participate without financial barriers. Usually at our in-person Jewish Poets events, we have a box to make contributions. So in place of our box, we'll put a link in the chat for those who wish to make a donation to the JCC Senior Department to continue to provide these wonderful programs. Thank you to those who've already responded to our fundraising appeal. Sarah's going to put a link in the chat how you can donate. Yesterday, we sent out the program in your email with the Zoom link reminder so you can follow along with us, or Sarah's going to put a link in the chat to our program for the evening. This evening was arranged by Eileen Wingard and Janice Alper. Please wave to our audience, Eileen and Janice. And I'd also like to introduce Joy Heitzman, who is emceeing by phone. Take it away, Joy.
Hi there. Tonight I am one of the Jewish voices of our Jewish Poets, Jewish Voices program, and I'm delighted to welcome everybody to the final session of our poetry season. And just would like to mention that this is the 12th year that we've been doing this program, and we are very grateful to the JCC and the Center for Jewish Culture for sponsoring this program over the years, and especially to Melanie and Sarah for all of their wonderful help in organizing and facilitating tonight's program. Tonight I am especially honored to have the opportunity to welcome Rabbi Marty Lawson, who's going to be telling us about the life of Natan Alterman, because normally I just introduce the program and then hand it over to Eileen Wingard, who then MCs the rest of the evening, and she always gets to introduce Rabbi Lawson. So it's a special pleasure to welcome Rabbi Lawson, who's going to tell us about the life of Natan Alterman. Rabbi?
Thank you, Joyce, and I want to say a special thank you to Eileen for once again inviting me to participate in this program. I want to tell you that I had the opportunity to study with Rachel Korazim in Israel and study Natan Alterman in greater detail. I could, I think, speak for about an hour and a half. I promise you I will not. I'm going to try and give you a brief introduction to his biography, but I want to show you a picture that I came upon of him that gives you a sense. You have on your program a picture from his later years. This is Alterman at his best when he was a young man, just having arrived in Eretz Yisrael, and as he was beginning to write for Haaretz in that time period. Let me begin by sharing some basic facts about him. He really is considered by many to be the first poet laureate of the emerging Jewish state. Born in Warsaw, Poland on August 14, 1910, Alterman moved with his family to Tel Aviv in 1925 at age 15. He took up his studies at the Herzliya Gymnasia, and he continued there until graduation. Then at age 19, Alterman went to Paris to study at La Sorbonne. He changed his mind. He really didn't like some of the academics there, and he took up the study of agronomy. You'll hear a little bit about that in a moment. He remained in France for 3 years, and periodically he would return to Israel, but he spent most of his time with French artists and writers, and only returned home to Israel, to Palestine at the time, when he wanted to see his family or friends. When he finally returned permanently to Tel Aviv in 1932, he began working at Mikveh Yisrael Agricultural School. but he soon realized that his real passion was journalism and poetry. Many people do not realize that he was a real Renaissance man. Alterman wrote plays, he wrote theatrical sketches, children's literature, as well as poetry. He was a gifted translator, translating works by Shakespeare, Molière, and Racine into Hebrew and Yiddish. He's also credited, and this goes back to his agronomy roots, with bringing the seeds of the Marmande tomato to Israel. That was produced in Israel until around 1968. And it was in that year that Alterman was also the recipient of the Israel Prize for his contribution to Hebrew literature. He began publishing his poetry first in 1931 in, of all places, and this seems so distant from our world today, in his weekly newspaper columns. There, writing first for Haaretz from 1934 to 1943. And then in 1943, he moved his column to Davar, the organ of the labor Zionist movement. Natan was 33 when he made this move. He had found success already as a poet and a popular songwriter. You'll hear both his poems and some of his songs tonight. And he served as editor of the night desk of Haaretz. He published his poems, his first poems, under the name Agav in Hebrew, Aleph Gimel Vet. Literally, it was a pseudonym, which means by way of. But everyone knew in Israel at that time that he was the author. He was fluent in 4 languages. He was also in charge of translating reports from foreign news agencies. I don't know how he found time to breathe. When Alterman approached Gershom Schochen, the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, for a raise, he was rebuffed. As his biographer, Professor Dan Laor, notes, Alterman's personal expenses had risen, and I'm going to quote Laor here, so I'm not making this up, not least because he was dividing his days and nights between 2 women, his lawful wife, the actress Rachel Marcus, the mother of their only child, their son, Tirza Attar, who later became a poet himself, and the other woman, his mistress, the illustrator Sila Binder. When Alterman moved to Davar, literally across the street, his rhyming column was given a central platform there. Israelis of that vintage, of that era, know it. It appeared every Friday on the far left column of page 2 of Davar. Thus, it became known as the 7th column. Now his byline appeared as N. Alterman, obviously in Hebrew though. This was the formative time of the Jewish state, and Natan was observing it all. Sitting in a Tel Aviv cafe called Kasit on November 29th, 1947, the evening after the United Nations General Assembly approved the plan for partitioning Palestine, drinking champagne with other artists and literati. I quote now from Dan Laor's writing. Between the boisterous songs and dances, Laor writes, the poet listened to a conversation between his friend Yitzhak Sadeh, the founder of the Palmach, the strike force of the pre-state Haganah militia, and Yosef Abidar, a senior Haganah commander. Abidar whispered to Sadeh that the creation of the state would exact 10,000 victims. Alterman listened in silence. Laor cites a later interview with Avidar's wife, the poet Yemima Avidar Chernovitz, who was also in Cafe Kasit that night, and recalled that Alterman had a look on his face that was, quote, filled with anxiety and pain. So, my friends, 2 weeks later, Alterman published his poem, Magash HaKesef, the silver platter, Magash HaKesef, sorry. It is based on a statement made by Chaim Weizmann at that time. Weizmann said, quote, a state is not given to a people on a silver platter, unquote. The poem was for many years read on Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day. The poem suggests that miracles are not the result of divine intervention, but rather human effort. As we listen to that poem tonight, I ask you to picture Alterman's feelings as he envisions a moment like the moment at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, filled with smoke and fire, where suddenly two young people, quote, with the dew of youth still on their head, I'm quoting Alterman himself, one female and one male, dirty, exhausted from battle, are asked by the nation, "Who are you?" And the two reply with a soft voice, "We are the silver platter on which the Jews' state was presented today," unquote. And then the two fall back in darkness as the dazed nation looks on. In a real way, Natan Alterman became one of the voices of socialist Zionist conscience for the Jewish state. Another example is found in his poem, Mikre Pa'ut, a tiny or a negligible event. We're not going to hear it tonight, but I wanted to share something about it with you. In it, he describes a moment from the summer of 1946 when a train filled with young people from northern Israel, many of them survivors of the Shoah, members of the blue-shirted Labor Party youth movement, they stopped the train and they raid an Arab cultivated watermelon field near the town of Tulkarm. They help themselves to the crop and destroy what remains. In the final verse of the poem, published in Davar, Alterman writes these words in translation. If we nurture great utopian visions, it is compulsory to deal with tiny things, and do not say it is a microscopic matter, for it is in the microscope that the germs are revealed. Alterman, as you can see, never held back. He criticized David Ben-Gurion at times, and he became known as the poet of the Yishuv. Following the Six-Day War in 1967, Alterman became a proponent of the Greater Land of Israel ideology. He died on March 28, 1970, only 59 years of age. Natan Alterman's image was chosen to be on the 200 shekel note in 2011. Truly, Alterman leaves behind a legacy of social conscience, of exalted literature and poetry, capturing the journey of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. Even today, an episode of season 3 of the Israeli Netflix show Shtisel is named after one of his poems, First Smile. It is read there at a memorial service during the show. So even today, his words continue to bless us, more so challenge us to live up to the highest ideals of our people. Toda rabba.
Shir HaEmek, Song of the Valley. Rest has come to the weary, night has fallen, and a hush lies over the entire valley. Rest, O beautiful valley, we shall stand guard over you. Israel, tal milmata ulvana me'al, מבית אלפא עד נהלל, ממה, לילה מליל דממה, בישראל נומה עמק, ארץ תפארת, אנו לך משמרת. נומה עמק, ארץ תפארת, גוברת, אנו לך משמרת, אנו לך משמרת. Lila, Lila, night, night. Night. The wind blows, the treetops stir. Hush. Snuff out the candle and shut your eyes. 3 riders were due. 1 fell prey. The second perished by sword. And the remaining 1 could not remember your name. Alone, you wait. Only the empty road. לילה, לילה, הרוח גוברת. לילה, לילה, חומה הצמרת. לילה, לילה, כוכב מזמר. נומי, נומי, כבי את הנר. נומי, נומי, כבי את הנר. לילה, לילה, נומי, נומי, כבי את הנר. לילה, לילה, הרוח גוברת. לילה, לילה, חומה הצמרת. לילה, לילה, רק את מחכה. נומי, נומי, הדרך ריקה. נומי, נומי, הדרך ריקה. לילה, לילה, נומי, נומי, הדרך ריקה.
This poem is called Memento of Rose. Send forth your songs like the doe and the fawn. Listen. Yet far, far away roar many roads that dug in the tunnels of the horizon, the blue, the red, and crossed in the stormy summer, gliding with villages to the well, and journeyed with rows of swaying trains to cities and fairs. Field roads, hill and valley roads, waves of their long breath, fields at moonlight in plaster masks, pastures, sun, and whistling. Roads in their expanse, white and singing. With a rope, desire dragged me. The sound of wheel and wind and brief meetings, a trotting horse's neigh between bell and whip, night flickering every jewel, and a wood huddled like a giant child to an inn opened to greet the guests. With pailfuls of laughter, the innkeeper's daughter emerges, beautiful in the red shawl and the blue ice of her eyes. Happy as he who gulped her cold milk somewhere along the 52nd league. Roads, roads, rows of nights passed over them like friars gone forth in throngs, lofty and fragile as their souls of water and air expired. Roads, with my own eyes, I drew you to me. Roads, with my own life, I loved you. Your fingernails scratch a fiery scar on the horizon that calls and erupts.
Easy, if you please unmute yourself. It's your turn now. Thank you.
Is it okay?
We hear you. Thank you.
מזכרת לדרכים. שלחו את שיריכם כאיילה ועופר, הקשיבו, עוד הרחק הרחק מנהמות הרבה דרכים, אשר חתרו במנהרות האופק, הכחולות וגם האדומות, וחצו בקיץ הסוער, וגלשו עם הכפרים לבאר, ונסעו בטור קרונות מתנודדים אל ההרים והירידים. דרכי שדה, דרכי פקעות וגבע, גלי נשמתן הארוכה. שדות לאור ירח במסוות הגבס, קרי מרעה ושמש ושריקה, דרכים אל מרחבן השער והלבן, בחבל הובילתני התשוקה. לכל גלגל ורוח וטיסת פגישות, ונחר סוס דוהר בין פעמון ושות, ולילה מהבהב בכל העדיים. וחורש מקובץ כילד ענקי, והפונדק נפתח לפגוש את הבאים, במלוא דליי צחוקה של בת הפונדקאי, אשר תצא יפה, באודם הסודר, בקרח התחלחל של העיניים, אשרי אשר גמה מחלב הקר, אי שמה בפרסה 52. דרכים דרכים, טורי לילות עברו בין כנזירים אחים, אשר יצאו בסך גבוה ושבריר, בפרוח נשמתם של מים ואוויר. אני אתכן דרכים, במו עיניי שאבתי, אני אתכן דרכים, במו חיי אהבתי, ציפורניכם שורטות צלקת אש, באופק הקורא והגועש.
This poem is entitled Saul. Now has ended the battle of Saul, day and eve, and the cries of the fleet. For the king on his sword did fall, and Gilboa lay clad in defeat. In the land, till the dawn was abroad, there ceased not the runner's run. A javelin dripping with blood announced that the battle was done. Now has ended the battle of Saul, for the king on his sword did fall. When on the mountains the daylight shone, came the runner to his mother's door, and falling at her feet with a moan, he covered her legs with his gore. Oh, with scarlet he covered her feet and the dust of the battlefield. And she said, "Rise, O son, from defeat." Tears in his eyes with darkness sealed. And he told her of the battle of Saul, how the king on his sword did fall. Then she said to the lad, "Ah, blood will cover a mother's feet. But sevenfold does a people bud that on its soil lies slain in defeat. The king has received his due, but his heir in good time will arise. For Saul on his soil did rest the sword on which he lies." Thus she spoke and shook with every word. So it was, and David heard.
הנה תמו יום קרב וערבו. הנה תמו יום קרב וערבו, המלא זעקת מנוסה. עת המלך נפל על חרבו, וגלבוע לבש תבוסה. ובארץ עד שחר קם, לא נדמו פרסות הרץ, ונחירי רמחו בדם, מבשרים כי הקרב נחרץ. הנה תמו יום קרב וערבו, והמלך נפל על חרבו. בהבריק על הרים יום יאור, בהרץ אל מפתן אמו, ונפלו לרגלי אדום, את רגליה כיסה דמו. את רגליה כיסה שני, ויהי עפר שדה קרב, ובדברה אליו, קומה בני, מיני דמה חשכו עיניו. ויספר לה יום קרב וערבו, איך המלך נפל על חרבו. אז אמרה לו לנער, דם, את רגלי אמהות יכסה, אבל 7 יקום העם, אם עלי אדמתו יובס. את המלך פקד הדין, אך יורש לא יקום כי עלי אדמתו השעין את חרבו, שעליה מת. כה דיברה וקולה הרעיד, ויהי כן וישמע דוד.
Moon. Also, an old image has a moment's birth. Sky without bird. Strange and fortified on the moonlight, night opposite your window, stands a city dipped in crickets' cry. And as you see the road still looking to the wayfarer, and the moon on the cypress's spear, you say, my God, are all these still here? May one still whisper to ask how they are? From their pools, the water looks at us. Tranquil is the tree in its ruby earrings. O our God, never shall be torn from me the sorrow of your great playthings.
ירח, גם למראה נושן יש רגע של הולדת, שמיים בלי ציפור, זרים ומבוצרים, בלילה הסעור מול חלונך עומדת עיר טבולה בבכי הצרצרים, ובראותך כדרך עוד צופה אל הלך, והירח על כידון הברוש. אתה אומר, אלי, העוד ישנם כל אלה? העוד מותר בלחש בשלומם לדרוש? מאגמיהם המים ניבטים אלינו, שוקט העץ באודם עגילים. לעד לא תעקר ממני, אלוהינו, תוגת צעצועיך הגדולים.
The maiden. She spun in silence a red thread, red as a pomegranate's heart. The king inside his chamber said, she spins me clothes to wear at court. She spun in silence a black thread that darkens day. Far from the king, the thief locked up in prison said, she spins me clothes in which to hang. She spun in silence a gold thread, a sword of lightning. On his way, the harlequin pranced past and said, she spins me clothes in which to play. She spun in silence a gray thread, the ancestor all colors keep. The beggar to his mongrel said, she spins me clothes in which to weep. She rose, the colored threads she took and wove them all into a mesh. And then she went to the brook, and there she washed her perfect flesh. And she put on the woven thing and was made beautiful forever. And she since then is thief and king and harlequin and beggar.
דום טבתה העלמה בפלך, חוט שני כרימון שחוט, והמר בלבבו המלך, היא טובה לי בגדי מלכות. דום טבתה העלמה בפלך, חוט שחור המחשיך הור יום, ואמר השודד בכלא, היא טובה לי בגדי גרדום. דום טבתה העלמה בפלך, חוט זהב כחרבות ברק, ואמר הלוליין בדרך, היא טובה לי בגדי משחק. דום טבתה העלמה בפלך, חוט אפור ואבי כל כסות, ואמרו פושט יד וחלב, היא טובה לנו בגדי בחוט. אז ארגה את חוטי הפלך העלמה, ותתנם בסך, ותרד אל מי הפלג, ותרחץ את בשרה הצח. ותלבש את מטווה הפלך לשמלה לה, ותיף לעד, ומאז היא שודד ומלך, ולוליין ופושטת יד.
Thank you, Omer. Michael Horvitz, you're up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
This one is entitled From All Peoples. When our children cried in the shadow of the gallows, we never heard the world's anger. For thou didst choose us from all peoples. Thou didst love us and favor us. For thou didst choose us from all peoples, Norwegians, Czechs, and Britons. And when our children are marched down to the gallows, Jewish children, wise Jewish children, they know that their blood is not counted in the bloodshed. They only call back to their mothers, "Mother, don't look." How great the concern for paintings and sculptures, treasures of art, lest they be bombed, while the art treasures of baby skulls are dashed against walls and pavements. Their eyes only speak, "Don't look, mother." Veterans we are, soldiers removed, renowned, only undersized. Their eyes speak yet of other things. God of the patriarchs, we know that thou didst choose us from all children to be slaughtered before thy throne of glory. And thou dost gather our blood in buckets, for there is none else to gather it. And thou dost scent it like the perfume of flowers, and dost sponge it up in a kerchief. And thou wilt seek it from the hands of them that murdered, and from the hands of those that kept silent.
מכל העמים. בבכות ילדינו בצל גרדומים, את חמת העולם לא שמענו. כי אתה בחרתנו מכל העמים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו. כי אתה בחרתנו מכל העמים, מנורווגים, מצ'כים, מבריטים, ובצעוד ילדינו אלי גרדומים, ילדים יהודים, ילדים חכמים, הם יודעים כי דמם לא נחשב בדמים. הם קוראים רק להם, אל תביטי. ורבה הדאגה לתמונות ופסלים ואוצרות אומנות פן יופצצו, אך אוצרות אומנות של ראשי עוללים אל קירות וכבישים ירוצצו. עיניהם מדברות, אל תביטי ההם. איך שורות ארוכות הונחנו, חיילים ותיקים וידועים לשם, רק קטנים בקומה אנחנו. עיניהם מדברות, עוד דברים אחדים. אלוהי האבות ידענו, שאתה בחרתנו מכל הילדים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו. שאתה בחרתנו מכל הילדים להרג מול כיסא כבודך, ואתה את דמנו אוסף בחדים, כי אין לו אוסף מלבדך. ואתה מריחו כמורח פרחים, ואתה מלקטו במטפחת. ואתה תבקשנו מידי הרוצחים ומידי השוקטים גם יחד.
Okay. Song to the wife of his youth. Not all is vanity, dear. Not all is pride and folly. I scattered my days to the winds. I broke my pact with money. Only you I pursued, my dear, like the neck pursues the hangman. For you donned your kerchief, dear, and you asked me to behold you. And I swore not to taste my bread till teeth rotted with your unripeness. I swore to look at you, dear, till my eyes grew dim with looking. And sickness struck, my dear. Poverty covered our faces. And sickness I called my house, and poverty our daughter. We were wretched as dogs, my dear, and dogs fled from our presence. Then iron appeared, my dear, beheading me of you, and nothing remained except my ashes pursuing your shoes. For iron breaks, my dear, but my thirst for you is unquenched. The spirit hath no end, my dear. The body has, and shatters. Joy did not visit my house, and earth prepared my bed. But the day you rejoice, my dear, my dead eyes will rejoice in the darkness. A day of joy, my dear, will come, and we will share it. And you'll fall to the earth of my pact when a coffin rope drops you to me. Not all is vanity, dear. Not all is pride and folly.
שיר לאשת נעורים. לא הכל הבלים ביתי, לא הכל הבלים והבל. גם לכסף הפרתי בריתי, כי זריתי ימיי להבל. רק אחרייך הלכתי ביתי, כצוואר אחרי החבל. כי עדית מטפחתך ביתי, כי אמרת לי הבט ובענה, ואדור לא לנשוך ביתי, עד שיניים מבשרך תיכנה, ואדור לראותך ביתי, עד עיניים מראותך תכהנה. והיכה החולי ביתי, והעוני כיסה פנינו, ואומר לחולי ביתי, ולעוני קראתי בננו. וגידל מכלבים ביתי, וינוסו כלבים מפנינו. אז עלה הברזל ביתי, ויסיר את ראשי מאלייך, ודבר לא נותר בלתי, עפרי המרדף נעלייך. כי ברזל יישבר ביתי, וצמאי לא נשבר אלייך. לא לכוח יש קץ ביתי, רק לגוף הנשבר כחרס. לא פקדה השמחה ביתי, ותישא אדמה לי ארס. אך ביום בו תגיל ביתי, גם תגלנה עיניי מארץ. עוד יבוא יום שמחה ביתי, עוד גם לנו בו יד וחבל, וצנחת אל אדמת בריתי, ואליי יורידוך בחבל. לא הכל הבלים ביתי, לא הכל הבלים והבל.
The joy of the poor. The joy of the poor knocked on the door. Till then, the man waited for her. She lifted her violin, joy of the poor. The deathly poor rejoiced in her. And he said, how pleasant, how good, the joy of the poor I have heard. At night, scolded and robbed on a straw pallet, he had dreamed of her as vengeance is dreamed, as the body pains and the poor man's lamb is pure. And he said, yeah, how pleasant, how good, You have come to me, joy of the poor. But the joy said, no, your destroyer has come. No, your last day has come to you. I do not tread your olive press or visit your home. With the bearers of the ark I go. And he said, to my tormentor, my foe, how will you return, joy of the poor? And she said, I go down with you to the pit. Arkman, you press me like a man still alive. You did not see my face until the end. The foe too shall not see me and live. And he said, yeah, how pleasant, how good that you are with me, joy of the poor.
שמחת עניים. דפקה על הדלת שמחת עניים, כי חיכה לה האיש עד עת. ותישא כינוריה שמחת עניים, וישמח בה עני כמת. ויאמר, מה טוב ומה נעים, כי שמעתי שמחת עניים. בלילה, שדוד ונזוף, חלמה על מצק הקש. חלומה כנקם וכואבת כגוף וצחה ככבשת הרש. ויאמר, מה טוב ומה נעים, כי בעטני שמחת עניים. ותאמר השמחה, לא, כי בא משחיתך, לא, כי בא לך יום אחרון. לא פקדתי ביתך, לא דרכתי גיתך, רק אלך עם נושאי הארון. ויאמר, אל צרי ומעני, איך תשובי שמחת העני. ותאמר, בור ארד איתך איש הארון, כי נושע תביא כמו חי, כי פניי לא ראית עד יום אחרון, וגם צר אל יראני וחי. ויאמר, מה טוב ומה נעים, כי איתי את שמחת עניים.
About this. Across the vanquished city in a jeep he did speed, a lad bold and armed, a young lion of a lad, and an old man and a woman on that very street cowered against a wall in fear of him clad. Said the lad smiling, milk teeth shining, "Yeah, I'll try the machine gun," and put it into play. To hide his face in his hands, the old man barely had time when his blood on the wall was sprayed. We shall sing then about delicate incidents whose name, don't you know, is murder. Sing of conversations with sympathetic listeners, of snickers of forgiveness that are slurred. For those in combat gear and we who impinge, whether by action or agreement subliminal, are thrust, muttering necessity and revenge, into the realm of the war criminal.
על זאת. חצה עלי ג'יפ את העיר הכבושה, נער עז וחמוש, נער כפיר, וברחוב המודבר איש זקן ואישה נלחצו מפניו אל הקיר. והנער חייך בשיניים חלב, אנסה המקלע, וניסה. רק הליט הזקן את פניו בידיו, ודמו את הכותל כיסה. אכזרית מלחמה, המטיף התמים באגרוף מפניה יוחזר. אך לכן צו היושר וצו הרחמים, לו יהיה בה כמוה אכזר. ומלחמת העם שעמדה לבליחת מול שבעת הגייסות של מלכי המזרח, לא תחת גם מפני אל תגידו בגת, היא אינה פחדנית כל כדי כך.
Anemones. כלניות. ליריקס נתן אלתרמן. מיוזיק משה וילנסקי. The evening comes, the sunset on the hill burns. I am dreaming and my eyes see. The young girl descends to the valley and it blazes with a fire of anemones. She'll pick up flowers to put in a bundle, and in the paths covered by dew, to mother she rushes, calling out to her, "Look what I brought for you in the basket." Anemones, reddish red-haired anemones of dew and grace. Sunset on the hill will blaze and go out, but the anemones will always bloom. Storms will thunder and roar greatly, but the anemones will always bloom. Years pass, the sunset blazes again. The girl grew, her beauty is endless. Going to the valley with her heart's chosen, and again anemones bloom in it. Her heart's chosen extends his hand to her, and she's laughing and so happy. She whispers to him between the kisses, "Look what I gathered here in the basket." The vows of love will be forgotten, but anemones will always bloom. For the vows are light as smoke, but the anemones are always the same. Years passed, sunset blazes in the hill. The girl is a grandma already, friends. Her granddaughter goes to the garden, and again anemones bloom in it. And when the girl calls to her, "Look, grandma, what I brought to you," from laughter and tears, her eyes glow, and she remembers a forgotten song. Yes, generations come and pass without end, but each generation has an anemone in a tune. Happy is the man if between storms and thunder, an anemone bloomed for him, if only just once. The song was sung by Shoshana Damari. I can sing as low as she sang. I just cannot imitate her Yemenite accent and beautiful accent. הערב בא, שקיעה בהר יוקדת, אני חולמת ורואות עיניי, הגיא נערה קטנה יורדת, ובאש כלניות לוהט הגיא. את הפרחים לצרור היא תלקט לה, ובשבילים המתכסים בטל, אל אמא היא נחפשת וקוראת לה, הביטי מה הבאתי לך בסל. כלניות, כלניות, כלניות הדמדמות הדמוניות, כלניות, כלניות, כלניות מטוללות חינניות. שקיעות בהר תבערנה ותדעכנה, אבל תמיד כלניות תפרחנה. סופות לרוב תהומנה ותסערנה, אך מחדש כלניות תבערנה. כלניות, כלניות, כלניות הדמדמות הדמוניות, כלניות, כלניות, כלניות חינניות מטוללות. שנים עוברות ושוב שקיעה יוקדת, הנערה גדלה יפתה בלי די, היא אל הגיא עם בחיר ליבה יורדת, ושוב כלניות פורחות בגיא. מושיט אליה בחיר ליבה על ידיים, והיא צוחקת ותלולה מטל, אליו לוחשת בין ינשיקותיים, הבט נא מה אספתי פה בסל. כלניות, כלניות, כלניות הדמדמות אדמוניות, כלניות, כלניות, כלניות מטוללות חינניות. שבועות האהבה אוי תשכחנה, אבל תמיד כלניות תפרחנה, כי השבועות קלות כמו עשן הן, אך הכלניות תמיד אותן הן. כלניות, כלניות, כלניות הדמדמות אדמוניות, כלניות, כלניות, כלניות מטוללות חינניות. שנים עברו, שקיעה בהר יוקדת, הנערה כבר סבתא ידידיי, הנה כבר נכדתה לגיא יורדת, ושוב כלניות פורחות בגיא. וכשקוראת הנערה אליה, הביטי סבתא מה הבאתי לך, מצחוק ודמע זוהרות עיניה, והיא זוכרת שיר מזמור נשכח. כלניות, כלניות, כלניות הדמדמות אדמוניות, כלניות, כלניות, כלניות מטוללות חינניות. כן הדורות באים חולפים בגלי גמר, אך לכל דור יש כלנית וזמר. אשרי האיש עם בין סופות ורעם, פרחה הכלנית לא רק אי פעם. כלניות, כלניות, כלניות הדמדמות אדמוניות, כלניות, כלניות, כלניות הדמדמות האדמוניות. מגש הכסף. The silver platter. The lyrics, Natan Alterman, and there are two versions apparently, one from 1947 by Chaim Alexander, but I will sing the more modern version by Nurit Hirsch. And the land grows still, the red eye of the sky slowly dimming over smoking borders. Torn at heart but breathing, a nation stands to greet the uniqueness of the miracle. As the ceremony draws near, stands wrapped in joy and terror, A girl and a boy stepped out and slowly marched toward the nation. Dressed in battle gear, dirty, shoes heavy with grime, they ascend the path quietly. Unwashed, they have not yet found time for that. Still bone weary from days and from nights in the field. Full of endless fatigue and unrested, but wearing youth-like dewdrops in their hair. They stand at attention, giving no sign of life or death. Then a nation in tears and amazement will ask, "Who are you?" And they will answer quietly, "We are the silver platter on which the Jewish state was served to you." And speaking, they fall back in shadow at the nation's feet, and the rest will be told in the Chronicles of Israel. והארץ תשקוט, אין שמיים עוד אמר, תעמעם לאיטה על גבולות השנים, ואם תעמוד קרועת לב אך נושמת, לקבל את הנס האחד אין שני. לטקס תיכון, היא תקום למול סהר, ועמדה למולם אותה חוק ואימה, אז מנגד יצאו נערה ונער, ואט אט יצעדו הם אל מול האומה. לובשי חול וחגור וכבדי נעליים, בנתיב יעלו הם הלוך והחרש. לא החליפו בגדם, לא מחו עוד במים, את תקוות יום הפרח וליל קו האש. עייפים עד בלי קץ, נזירים ממרגוע, ונוטפים תללי נעורים עבריים. דום השניים יקשו ועמדו לבלינוע, ואין עוד אם חיים הם או אם ירועים. אז תשאל האומה שטופת דמה וקסם, ואמרה מי אתם, מי אתם? והשניים שוקטים יענו לה, אנחנו מגש הכסף שעליו לך ניתנה מדינת היהודים. כך יאמרו ונפלו לרגלה עוטפי צל, והשאר יסופר בתולדות ישראל.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Elisheva, and thank you to all the readers. That was just beautiful. And we're about to continue our evening of poetry and song. And it is my pleasure to introduce Janice Alper, who co-chaired tonight's program with Eileen Wingard. And Janice is going to be telling us about the life of Zelda. Janice?
Thank you. I first encountered Zelda's poetry almost 50 years ago as a student of the Hebrew Union College, and it's always charmed me. The poetry of Zelda Schneerson Mishkovsky, known to her teachers simply her readers simply as Zelda, is unique in style, background, and personality among the modern Hebrew. She was born in Russia in 1914 as an only child, descendant of prominent Hasidic rabbis, and emigrated with her family to Palestine when she was 12, where her mother was shortly widowed. And she remained enrolled in religious schools and eventually at a teacher's college, and began to write and publish poetry. She and her mother moved to Tel Aviv, where she studied painting. And as many of us have seen when Rachel Korazin presents poems recently, her paintings are sometimes presented with her poetry. They moved on to Haifa when her mother remarried, and there in Haifa, she developed this love of the landscape and paid homage to Carmel in poems. In 1935, she left her mother and moved to Jerusalem because she wanted to pursue her dream of painting. And in order to earn money, she worked as a house painter, but she never earned enough for tuition to go to Betzalel. But she did continue to write and paint on her own and returned to Haifa to care for her mother, where she continued to write poetry and teach in an elementary school. They returned to Jerusalem after her mother was widowed a second time and settled in a dilapidated ground floor apartment in the Kerem Avraham neighborhood, which is part of Geula today. At age 36, she married Chaim Mishkovsky, and the two of them stayed together with her mother in this little apartment. She gave up teaching and was a caregiver to both of them, her mother and to Chaim, who became ill shortly after they were married. And it was at this time that she really started to write a lot of poetry. Chaim encouraged her to publish her work. Her first book, Panai, Leisure, was published in 1967 to great acclaim, was dedicated to her parents. Her second collection, HaKarmel HaNi'ara, The Invisible Carmel, dedicated to Chaim in 1971, was released shortly after he died. 5 years after she was widowed, she moved to the thriving literary and intellectual community of Chavia, and she began taking in boarders, mostly young women who she treated as daughters, and in some instances supported them financially and often provided them with wedding receptions and celebrations. They remained devoted to her, and during her last years, when she was suffering from cancer, it was these women and their families that surrounded her. And her final book, and we'll hear that tonight, her final book was completed shortly before her death in 1984, and it's dedicated to the friends of my soul. The late Amos Oz pays homage to Zelda in his autobiography of Love and Darkness. He prides himself on continuing the relationship from the time she was his teacher in second grade until her death. In discussing her poetry, he says, a strange, anarchic Hebrew, a Hebrew belonging to stories of the pious and to Hasidic tales and folk parables, a Hebrew overflowing with Yiddish, violating every rule, mixing feminine with masculine, present with past, noun with adjective, a sloppy, even muddled Hebrew. But what vitality there was in these stories. When a story was about snow, it seemed written in words of snow. And when it was about air, the words themselves burned. And what strange hypnotic sweetness there was in her tales about all kinds of miracles. Though the writer dipped the letters in wine, the words went spinning in the mouth. Marcia Falk, who beautifully translated a number of Zelda's poems in her wonderful book, The Spectacular Difference, wrote, one of the things which became a source of fascination and puzzlement was the abundance of seemingly symbolic figures that populated the poems, images that seemed drawn from elsewhere, elements of the world, such as a strange plant, black rose, simple nouns matched with plain adjectives. Where had these figures come from? I was never to find the answer because the sources I was looking for did not exist. Eventually, I'd come to see that Zelda's poems, like the lyrics of Dickinson or the early poems of Blake, contain a world of personal symbols, which have great resonance within the poet's genre, which are not necessarily rooted outside of it. And then Falk goes on to relate a personal story where she asked Zelda what was meant by a golden fish. And Zelda replied, "It's a golden fish, that's all." Zelda's poetry continues to be popular today. Her 6 books of mystical religious verse were bestsellers, meriting multiple reprintings and garnering numerous literary awards, including the prestigious Bialik and Brenner Prizes. Kibbutzniks, yeshiva students, academics and soldiers, people of all ages, religious orientations, and political persuasions are among her fans. One of her poems, L'chol ish yesh shem, each person has a name, ultimately achieved iconic status and is now recited in Israel on every Yom HaShoah. And we will end our program with this wonderful poem in song. Thank you very much.
This old house. The modest house is partner to the celebrations of the sky. The sun thrusts its burning gold into it, and night floods it with the darkness of stars. Beyond the horizon, there on the horizon, the steep mountains live their silent lives, wrapping their secret in a gray shawl. And beneath the floor of the house, the earth lives its hidden life, its unique life, along with all that is concealed within, seeds, roots, and springs. And the humble house sings no songs about the nearness of the abyss, about the reign of nothingness, and the silent house does not sway, and the strange house is not drunk. A vague expression spills over the dark stones, and this is almost security.
הבית הישן. הבית הצנוע שותף להילולת השמיים. השמש משליך אל תוכו את זהבו הבוער, והלילה מציף אותו באפלת כוכבים. שם, מעבר לבית, באופק, חיים את חייהם האילמים, ההרים הנשפים, העוטים את סודם בצעיף אפור. ומתחת לרצפת הבית, חי את חייו התמירים, את חייו המיוחדים, העפר, וכל מה שטמון בתוכו. זרעים, שורשים, מעיינות. ואין הבית הענב שר שירים על קרבת התהום, על שלטון העין, ואין הבית השותק מתנודד, ואין הבית המשונה שיכור. הרשת של סתמיות שפוכה על פני אבניו הכהות, והרי זה כמעט ביטחון.
My peace. My peace is tied by a thread to yours, and the beloved holidays and glorious seasons of the year, with the wealth of fragrance, flowers, fruit, leaves, and winds, the fog and the rain. When sudden snow and the dew are suspended on a thread of longing, I and you and the Sabbath, I and you and our lives in the last incantation, I and you and the lie and the fear and the breaches, I and young, the creator of heavens that have no shore, I and you and the riddle, I and you and death.
שלומי. שלומי קשור בחוט אל שלומך, והחגים האהובים ותקופות השנה הנפלאות, עם אוצר הריחות, הפרחים, הפרי, העלים והרוחות, ועם הערפל והמטר, השלג הפתאומי והטל, תלויים על חוט הכמיהה. אני ואתה והשבת, אני ואתה בחיינו, בגולגול הקודם, אני ואתה והשקר והפחד והקרעים, ובורא השמיים שאין להם חוף. אני ואתה והחידה, אני ואתה והמוות.
Uncombed hair. A single word shattered all the lights. A single word turned a lit street into a dark forest. The angel who revealed himself to Hagar came to the terrible forest, came to the end of the world to touch her hand. But she fled from the angel as from a mirage, crying, "You don't exist, you don't exist, you don't exist. Don't tempt me with empty secrets." A fountain rushed toward her, shimmering with water, bearing branches and leaves. But she, completely soaked, cried, "My poor soul delusions again." Little sister with uncombed hair, do not flee from the sound of angels. Your life hums with yearning. Your flesh is not a fable, and the red-haired man, friend of the sun, knows you are summer, knows you are a fruit-bearing tree.
ראש לא מסורק. מילה אחת ניפצה את כל הפנסים. מילה אחת הפכה רחוב מואר ליער חשוך. המלאך שנגלה אל הגר בא אל היער הנורא, בא אל סוף העולם, לגעת בידה. אך היא נמלטה מן המלאך, כמו ממקסם שווא זועקת. אינך קיים, אינך קיים, אינך קיים. אל תפתני בסודות של רוח. מעיין רץ לקראתה בנצנוצי מים עם ענפים ועלים. אך היא, רטובה כולה, בכתה. הבוי לנפשי, שוב תעתועים? אחות קטנה, ראש לא מסורק, אל תברחי מצליל המלאכים. חייך מציאות הומה, בשרך איננו משל. והאיש האדמוני, ידיד השמיים, יודע שאת קיץ, יודע שאת עץ פרי.
When the brown-faced woman who was at that moment polishing the floor heard the doctor's words, she said to me, I will pray for you. A sudden new friend said to me, I will pray for you.
כאשר שמעה האישה שחומת הפנים, שמירקה את הרצפה אז, את דברי הרופא, אמרה לי, אני אתפלל עלייך. ידידה פתאומית, תמול לא נודעת, אמרה לי, אני אתפלל עלייך.
About facts. My soul says, facts conceal the sea. My senses say, facts are an island in the ocean. My soul says, facts are a wall around the self. My senses say, facts are a window lit in the dark, a lens into my core. And from the beginning, the abyss has said facts are a lion roaring in space, existing, existing, existing.
נפשי אומרת, העובדות מסתירות את הים. חושיי אומרים, העובדות אי באוקיינוס. נפשי אומרת, העובדות חומה סביב האני. חושיי אומרים, העובדות חלון מואר בחושך, צוהר לפנימיותי. ומאז ומעולם אומרת התהום, העובדות אריה, שואג בחלל, קיים, קיים, קיים.
I lie in my house. I lie in my house, and in the distant distance, the sea wanders through the dark. Leave a bit of life for me. Do not ravage me, O sufferings.
אני בביתי שוכבת, והים מרחוק מרחוק, בחושך יעלוך. השאירו מעט אור בי, אל תעשקוני ייסורים.
Each rose. Each rose is an island of the promised peace, the eternal peace. In each rose dwells a sapphire bird whose name is, they shall beat their swords. And the light of the rose seems so near, and its fragrance so near, and the silence of its leaves so near. That island so near. Take a boat and cross the sea of fire.
השלום המובטח, השלום הנצחי. בכל שושנה מתגוררת ציפור, ספירית, ששמה וככתו. ונדמה כה קרוב, אור השושנה, כה קרוב, ניחוחה, כה קרוב, שקט העלים, כה קרוב. אותו אי, כך סירה, וחצה את ים האש.
the invisible Carmel. When I die, to become another essence, the invisible Mount Carmel, which is all mine, all the quintessence of joy, whose needles, cones, flowers, and clouds are carved into my flesh. Will part from the visible Carmel with its boulevard of pine trees descending to the sea. Does the pleasure of a red sunset come from the mortal element in me? And the pleasure of earth perfumes, and the moment when the sea bursts into spray, and the moment of return to the stern gaze of Jerusalem's sky, to the Supreme One. Is all this from the mortal element?
כאשר אמות לעבור למהות אחרת, יפרד הכרמל ההיא נראה, שהוא כולו שלי. כולו תמצית האושר, שמחתיו, אצטרובליו, פניו, פרחיו וענניו. חקוקים בבשרי מן הכרמל הנראה, עם סדרת האורנים שיורדת לים. האם תענוג השקיעה האדומה הוא מיסור התמותה שבי, ותענוג הפסמים ורגע ערפילי המים ורגע השיבה למבט התקיף של שמי ירושלים, לעליון על הכל, האם מסוד התמותה הוא.
In my dream, we strolled through a festive nocturnal city surrounded by dark splendor and a bustling crowd. My heart was tender and fresh as a tree planted beside streams of water. Perhaps waking is not what is real, for how shall I understand that the one walking by my side, tall and beautiful, far from the moon, has his soul before you, God?
בחלומי, טיילנו בעיר לילית וחוגגת. פאר אפלולי היה סביבנו וקהל שוקק. ליבי היה רך עליי ורענן כעץ שתול על פלגי מים. אולי הקיצה איננה הממש, כי איך אבין שההולך לצידי גבוה ויפה, רחוק מן הירח, ונשמתו לפניך, אדוני.
When you were here, your brown glance protecting me and your thoughts touching suddenly wing to wing. When you were with me among the passing things, the walls were like elderly relations, telling ancient tales in the evenings as we drank our tea. Now, the walls are no shelter, withdrawn into their own silence. They pay no attention to my fall. Now the walls are plaster and concrete, a strange element, matter unresponsive as death.
כאשר היית פה. כאשר היית פה, ומבטך החום מגן עליי, ומחשבותינו נוגעות פתע, כנף אל כנף. כאשר היית עמדי, בתוך הדברים החולפים, היו הקירות בני בית קשישים, שסיפרו מעשיות עתיקות בערב כאשר שתינו תה. עכשיו הקירות אינם מחסה. הם הסתגרו בשתיקתם ולא ישגיחו בנופלי. עכשיו הקירות סיד ומלט יסוד זר. חומר לא עונה כמוות.
Each of us has a name. L'chol ish yesh shem. Each of us has a name given by God and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and our smile and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the mountains and given by our walls. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our sins and given by our longing. Each of us has a name given by our enemies and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death.
לכל איש יש שם שנתן לו אלוהים ונתנו לו אביו ואמו. לכל איש יש שם שנתנו לו קומתו באופן חיוכו ונתן לו הערים. לכל איש יש שם שנתנו לו ההרים ונתנו לו גדליו. לכל איש יש שם שנתנו לו המזלות ונתנו לו שכניו. לכל איש יש שם, לכל איש יש שם, לכל איש יש שם שנתנו לו חטאיו ונתנו לו כמיהתו. לכל איש יש שם שנתנו לו שונאיו ונתנה לו אהבתו. לכל איש יש שם שנתנו לו חגיו ונתנה לו מלאכתו. לכל איש יש שם שנתנו לו תקופות השנה ונתן לו עברונו. לכל איש יש שם, לכל איש יש שם, לכל איש יש שם שנתן לו אלוהים ונתנו לו אביו ואמו. לכל איש יש שם שנתן לו הים ונתן לו מותו.
thank you to all the wonderful participants. The 24 people who made this program possible include the two introducers, Rabbi Martin Lawson and Janice Alper, who introduced the poets, the wonderful music from my daughter Mila Wingard and from Elisheva Edelson that gave a beautiful framework to the readers. The Hebrew readers, Easy Waxman, Yiftach Levi, Guri Stark, Omer Zalmanovich, Giula Hebron, Sari Esserman, Galit Stam, Orly Moses, Leah Stark, and the English readers, Michael Horvitz, Daniel Warren, Eli Meltzer, Dan Wingard, my son, Sarah Apple, Lennon, Leanne Netzer, Susie Meltzer, Liba Sherman, and Sandra Silverstein. Thank you to everybody. And thanks especially to Melanie Rubin and to Sarah Mattis for the technological support and all the other support for making this program possible.
And to Eileen, we couldn't do it without you, Eileen.
It was a great pleasure working with all these wonderful people who put their heart into their service tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we sign off, we have a few quick announcements. The San Diego Center for Jewish Culture presents its next program in the We Are the Tree of Life series. The virtual event titled Dance of the Holocaust is scheduled for Tuesday, May 25th at 11 a.m. Israeli-American dancer Tammuz Dubnov performs choreographed dances from the Holocaust. Dubnov will explain his choreography between pieces, which include a sequence portraying the story of Marcel Marceau. Please check out our website for details at lfjcc.org, and we'll put the meeting registration in the chat. Thank you again, Eileen Wingard, and thank you so much to the Jewish Poets, Jewish Voices Committee for another fantastic program. We look forward to next season, and thank all of you for attending this evening. Thank you so much.